In this video help, we're covering the service inventory. Let's take a look at this. Service inventory has the asset service inventory, the inventory service list view, inventory orders, where you're actually doing orders from the vendor, the inventory order list view, which indicates each record for each order, the order portal for the inventory, which is the individual records for each individual item on order, the inventory RMA, where you get return authorizations in case you're missing a item that was shipped to you or it's damaged when you receive it, or it's not working, or it has to be returned because you received the wrong type item. Then the list view for each RMA. Then the vendor screen, where you list each vendor that you're using as far as your vendor access to purchasing items. The vendor list for each vendor, which is a row item for each item for the vendor. And then the inventory type list, which is another one of those list items that you use in the drop-down area in the screen. The last item is the inventory order print portal, where you can actually print a purchase order for the inventory items that you want to send, if you want to send a document or have a backup copy of the actual order on paper that you created when you ordered the individual items for the vendor. So let's go over and take a look at the record again. In this case, you're adding a new record each time you come in, you place a new order. You're creating a new inventory item, which will give you a service ID, which is the one that links the related records, parent to child records. The next thing you're going to be doing is, and this is the type item list, where you drop it down and you'll see the list of the items that we showed you before. This is a different set of items in the type service items list, and you can add and edit this by going to the record over here for the type item service. Let's go to the type item service list right there at the bottom. That's the type item services. When you create the record, you add the type of service item so you can search on it based on the kind of item that it is. Some items are not consumables, and they need to have a different designation to them, where consumables like rags and fuels and cleaners and stuff like that would still be in your inventory list because they're used to service items like oil and lubricants. But things that are hard parts would have to have an item part name, of course, for all of them. Now, what happens is every time you make a new item, you can use this within a purchase order, where you don't have to repeat this record, because as you're in the work order, you can use the drop-down list to pick this item. Now, it's strongly suggested what you do is you use the part number either for your company or the vendor part number, which is down here. And if they're the same, it would be the part number for both. If it's not, and you're ordering it from different vendors and it has different part numbers, you're going to want to have that vendor's part number in that record as far as the item that you're looking at. In this particular case, we can add an image of the item that we're actually purchasing. So when we receive it, we have something to make sure that we have the right part according to the picture that we have. To actually add an image in here on the iPad or iPhone or on the desktop, you would either tap or click in the screen. In this case, because it's on a simulated iPad, you would go ahead and say replace if there's already a picture in there, or add from the photo library, and you could have a picture that it was created on a website, or you can go to their website, take a right mouse click or tap and click from the iPad or iPhone, and then paste that image back into this area here once it's on the clipboard. You can also export the items, and if you want to do an export, the export is also supported under the Do Action menu, where you can export records. And then if you needed to delete a record, you could delete it. Now, I don't suggest that you delete ever a record where you have ongoing materials that you're buying, and the same thing goes for both assets and asset information. It's not a good practice to delete them because they're historical and used for trend analysis for different things. And especially when you're buying inventory items, you're going to want to know how many times you bought it, where you bought it, who you bought it from, and the history down here in comments for the vendor that supports the information about the item you bought from that vendor. Now, in this record, when you create the part number up here, you're also putting it in here because you can search either on the part number or on the item name with the part number leading it. The reason we put the part number leading is that when you're doing a lookup on the actual work order, it's much easier to find the part by its part number, numerically because it sequences in alphanumeric, and that way you don't have to try to figure out the difference between a console this and a console that or whatever it might be, especially if it's like oil and it has a different mil-spec ID number or something into that kind of a description. So you want to lead it off if you've got a part number with that, so it's easier to find when you do a drop-down list because it puts them in order and it's easy to find them. The next thing is the description of the item. This is just a little narrative, a short one that just describes the actual item that you're working with, which is similar to this. Now I just used an image just so I would have one. In this case I'm looking at a console base, which would probably be something that this would be supported by and on a slide out cabinet where you would slide it out of a console, and this would be the item that was on the console rack. But that's just a typical thing. You have to itemize each item so that you can understand what it is when you're looking at the record. The next thing we're going to be looking at is the used on. Now used on is really important. When you're looking through the different products and you need to understand where exactly is this item used, you would put a short narrative in here. It may be a little longer than obviously the description, so you would have a scroller in here so in case you had to add additional information to identify what this is. For example, you would want to maybe know what subassembly this is, or is it an assembly, or is it a sub-subassembly like a part within a bigger item, so that you know how it fits on and what it fits to. The next thing is the high level and low level. Now what this is if you use your trend analysis over a period of time, it will give you the opportunity to set a high and low level, so you'll know over a period of time how many times you're going to use this item and at what period of time it's normally used. Now some things are monthly dependent. You have to have so many per month. Other ones are seasonal. So if they're seasonal, you probably only want to buy them and manage the high and low levels for that season. The quantity on hand is calculated for you, by the way. As you order an item from the purchase order, it will put the quantity in that you purchased within the individual record based on its actual ID. It'll provide you with the information for that item to the quantity that's actually added. If you reorder and you have some in there, it's going to add it to that and calculate the summary based on the existing orders that you have. The next thing is if you purchased items, you would have a purchased item quantity for the quantity purchased, and that would be in the order item, and that would tell you how many you've actually ordered over a period of time. The quantity used is if you do a work order and you actually use the item, when you use it in the order item, it will be deducted from the quantity on hand, and the quantity on hand would then be reduced by the amount that you actually use in the subassembly or whatever you're using as far as the product that you're supporting. Quantity required per assembly. So for example, this would be a 1 if I was putting in a bracket that would hold this onto the cabinet for the console. But if I was doing something like oil and I had a case of 24 and it takes 5 quarts per service, then I would have a quantity required per usage of 5, and then I would want to have a reflecting number for the high level and low level depending on the amount of equipment that this is used on. Down at the bottom you can add in additional narrative down here that would cover the item's comments. The item comments are anything about that product that is unique to that product as far as either its usage or information about how that product should be supported or shelf life. Over on this side now, the actual vendor select, if you click on this underlined header, it will take you to the vendor list and allow you to view the vendor list. And we also have a vendor screen portal up here. If you click on it, it's going to indicate all the vendors that you have in your current system and comments about the vendor themselves as far as maybe what products they supply to you in the scrollable list, which you can have very large. And in this particular case, you would have 1 record per vendor per record in this inventory system that's used in order to provide supply items. So what you're doing is when you look in this, you could look up and say, oh, well, where does Allied Computer and what are we buying from them? Or you might have a different branch of Allied Computer, which maybe not be the systems, it may be something else. You can have any number of records in here that support this item that you're working on. The next thing is you actually can click in here, and it provides, now I only have one vendor in there right now, but it allows you to pick the vendor, and it also shows you the address so you can tell the specific address of which it's being bought from. And of course, when I looked up here under the vendor support portal, I can tell where that city or where that is actually from. But this is actually created in the vendor record individually so that you have a drop down that you can pick. When you pick that particular vendor, it'll give you the information for that on the actual work order when you create it. Now, if you're going to be changing vendors back and forth depending on where you're going to buy this item, I kind of suggest if it's a different part number that you're using to make sure that you have a double record. In other words, one record for each different vendor based on the actual part number. For example, if I'm buying oil for a thing and maybe the oil is Shell oil, but I'm also buying Pennzoil, it would be a different record and it would be a different usage, maybe a different viscosity or SAE or whatever for that particular product, which would be noted over here in this area over here. Now down here about the vendor, you may want to be putting in notes about the vendor. Maybe it's lead time information you need to know about for a particular product, or other information that relates to it, where it may be something seasonal or non-seasonal, where when you're going to order it, you may want to order it when you can get it from the vendor, as opposed to waiting and just trying your luck to see what would come up when you go to the vendor. Plus, there's other things about vendored items that they may be going out of stock or going up and down in price, and you probably want to have that indicated in here if it's going to go up and down in price. And some things are bought seasonally and they're lower price in certain times of the year than others. The price of the item is the vendor cost that you're actually paying for that item, and then the actual used on work order price, you may add an additional amount to that particular thing based on shelf life requirements or whatever it might be that adds value to it as far as when you're buying and paying for it. Now understand that this is a cost to the company item. It's not something that you're vending out to a company outside of your company. If you're going to be vending outside, you're going to want to probably add a margin to this. And if you're doing work orders where you're doing support for an outside company, you're definitely going to want a margin on it. And the same thing goes for the labor. Now let's go up and look at the actual popovers so we understand what those are about. We just showed you the vendor support portal. I'll pop it up just one more time to have it look at it. Okay. And in this screen, you see that it has a vendor phone, email, website, vendor contacts, 2 of those, vendor phones, 2 of those. And if you need to, you can pop right over to the vendor record by clicking on the portal ID. And this is the record where you're actually working within the individual record if you want to do a find on the individual company for that vendor. Let's go back over to the inventory support. The next thing we're looking at is the technical data. Now this is an interesting field in that if this has specifications for a particular item on the website where you're actually buying the item, you can copy that and then paste it into this area here. There may be things, for example, like how long a filter should last if you're buying filters. There may be anything that has to do with the manufacturer of the item that you're working with, where they have issues about certain things that you have to understand about how it's packed, how it's stored. For example, does it need to be cold stored, or does it need to be in a dry environment, and what temperature ranges should it be stored at? This is true of anything that has a chemical to it, like paints, solvents, and those kinds of things. Plus there's also hazards, like hazardous material usage. In a company, you're probably going to have hazardous material requirements where you're supposed to document any kind of hazardous material and how to, for example, if it's splashed in somebody's eyes, how do you service that as far as the person is concerned. So it's very important to have that kind of information available to you within your own company. The next thing is the service inventory list. What this is this is the service item orders are not added in this screen, but only edited. You're actually adding these in the purchase order screen, but the nice thing about this screen is that you can go to the individual order record by clicking on the portal item for this. It'll take you to that order item. Bounce over there. This is the individual order item in that record, and you can do a find based on that, and you can get a list within the list view of all the items that are the same that were bought on whatever time span they were bought on. Let's go back over, and we're going to go back to here. So the service inventory orders was that screen. Now we're going to service work orders. This is on the other side where you're actually using the service work order and dispensing products for services unscheduled and scheduled. And in this particular screen, what we're looking at is the item ID for the record that we're looking at, which is this one, the serviceman that's going to actually perform the service. And if you click on that, in the actual record where you're creating, there's a drop down. It's not done in the one you're viewing, but is in the actual service work order. You would see the actual serviceman. The same thing goes for the item. Now it's locked in here so you don't change it accidentally, because when you add it over in the service work order, you don't want it changed in the screen. The item quantity that's actually used. Now you can edit that here if you need to or you want to. If you had to change the item price or item line sum for this item from this screen, you could do it. And in this particular case, it's showing the actual quantity that is used for this item, meaning that each record that you see here is only for the item that's listed in the inventory system. So this would be a list of every time that this has been sold. You can pop to the portal, or you can go to the actual work order where this one is listed and see it in the actual work order screen. So let's go back over. The last item we looked at was the service work order. Now we're going to go next, when we go down, we're going to have another video help where we're going to cover all the ancillary screens and go through them and look at the reports and the list items and also the inventory order item. Then we'll follow that up by looking at the actual service work order and how that reflects on the usage over here within this service work order area for the inventory. Thank you for taking the video.